An Essay on the Development of Christian Doctrine by John Henry Newman. Chapter 1. On the Development of Ideas. Section 1. On the Process of Development in Ideas. It is the characteristic of our minds to be ever engaged in passing judgment on the things which come before us. No sooner do we apprehend than we judge. We allow nothing to stand by itself. We compare, contrast, abstract, generalize, connect, adjust, classify. And we view all our knowledge in the associations with which these processes have invested it. Of the judgments thus made, which become aspects in our minds of the things which meet us, some are mere opinions which come and go, or which remain with us only till an accident displaces them, whatever be the influence which they exercise meanwhile. Others are firmly fixed in our minds, with or without good reason, and have a hold upon us, whether they relate to matters of fact, or to principles of conduct, or our views of life and the world, or our prejudices, imaginations, or convictions. Many of them attach to one and the same object, which is thus variously viewed, not only by various minds, but by the same. They sometimes lie in such near relation that each implies the others. Some are not only inconsistent with each other, in that they have a common origin, some, as being actually incompatible with each other, are one or other falsely associated in our minds with their object. And in any case they may be nothing more than ideas which we mistake for things. Thus Judaism is an idea which once was objective, and Gnosticism an idea which never was so. Both of them have various aspects. Those of Judaism were such as monotheism, a certain ethical discipline, a ministration of divine vengeance, a preparation for Christianity. Those of the Gnostic idea are such as the doctrine of two principles, that of emanation, the intrinsic malignity of nature, the inculpability of sensual indulgence, or the guilt of every pleasure of sense, of which last two, one or other must be in the Gnostic a false aspect, and subjective only. The idea which represents an object, or supposed object, is commensurate with the sum total of its possible aspects, however they may vary in the separate consciousness of individuals, and in proportion to the variety of aspects under which it presents itself to various minds is its force and depth, and the argument for its reality. Ordinarily, an idea is not brought home to the intellect as objective except through this variety. Like bodily substances, which are not apprehended except under the clothing of their properties and results, and which admit of being walked round and surveyed on opposite sides, and in different perspectives, and in contrary lights, in evidence of their reality. And as views of a material object may be taken from points so remote or so opposed that they seem at first sight incompatible, and especially as their shadows will be disproportionate or even monstrous, and yet all these anomalies will disappear, and all these contrarieties be adjusted, on ascertaining the point of vision or the surface of projection in each case. So also all the aspects of an idea are capable of coalition, and of a resolution into the object to which it belongs. And the prima facie dissimilitude of its aspects becomes, when explained, an argument for its substantiveness and integrity, and their multiplicity for its originality and power. There is no one aspect deep enough to exhaust the contents of a real idea, no one term or proposition which will serve to define it, though of course one representation of it is more just and exact than another, and though when an idea is very complex, it is allowable, for the sake of convenience, to consider its distinct aspects as if separate ideas. Thus, with all our intimate knowledge of animal life and of the structure of particular animals, we have not arrived at a true definition for any one of them, but are forced to enumerate properties and accidents by way of description. Nor can we enclose in a formula that intellectual fact or system of thought which we call the Platonic philosophy, or that historical phenomenon of doctrine and conduct which we call the heresy of Montanus or of Manes. Again, if Protestantism were said to lie in its theory of private judgment, and Lutheranism in its doctrine of justification, this indeed would be an approximation to the truth. But it is plain that to argue or to act as if the one or the other aspect were a sufficient account of those religions severally would be a serious mistake. Sometimes an attempt is made to determine the leading idea, as it has been called, of Christianity, an ambitious essay as employed on a supernatural work, when even as regards the visible creation and the inventions of man, such a task is beyond us. Thus its one idea has been said by some to be the restoration of our fallen race, by others philanthropy, by others the tidings of immortality, or the spirituality of true religious service, or the salvation of the elect, or mental liberty, or the union of the soul with God. If, indeed, it is only thereby meant to use one or other of these as a central idea for convenience, in order to group others around it, no fault can be found with such a proceeding. And in this sense I should myself call the Incarnation the central aspect of Christianity, out of which the three main aspects of its teaching take their rise: the sacramental, the hierarchical, and the ascetic. But one aspect of revelation must not be allowed to exclude or to obscure another. And Christianity is dogmatical, devotional, practical, all at once. It is esoteric and exoteric. It is indulgent and strict. It is light and dark. It is love and it is fear. When an idea, whether real or not, is of a nature to arrest and possess the mind, it may be said to have life, that is, to live in the mind which is its recipient. Thus mathematical ideas, real as they are, can hardly properly be called living, at least ordinarily. But when some great enunciation, whether true or false, about human nature, or present good, or government, or duty, or religion, is carried forward into the public throng of men and draws attention, then it is not merely received passively in this or that form into many minds, but it becomes an active principle within them, leading them to an ever new contemplation of itself, to an application of it in various directions, and a propagation of it on every side. Such is the doctrine of the divine right of kings, or of the rights of man, or of the anti-social bearings of a priesthood, or utilitarianism, or free trade, or the duty of benevolent enterprises, or the philosophy of Zeno or Epicurus, doctrines which are of a nature to attract and influence, and have so far a prima facie reality, that they may be looked at on many sides, and strike various minds very variously. Let one such idea get possession of the popular mind, or the mind of any portion of the community, and it is not difficult to understand what will be the result. At first men will not fully realize what it is that moves them, and will express and explain themselves inadequately. There will be a general agitation of thought, and an action of mind upon mind. There will be a time of confusion, when conceptions and misconceptions are in conflict, and it is uncertain whether anything is to come of the idea at all, or which view of it is to get the start of the others. New lights will be brought to bear upon the original statements of the doctrine put forward. Judgments and aspects will accumulate. After a while some definite teaching emerges, and as time proceeds, one view will be modified or expanded by another, and then combined with a third, till the idea to which these various aspects belong will be to each mind separately what at first it was only to all together. It will be surveyed, too, in its relation to other doctrines or facts, to other natural laws or established customs, to the varying circumstances of times and places, to other religions, polities, philosophies, as the case may be. How it stands affected toward other systems, how it affects them, how far it may be made to combine with them, how far it tolerates them when it interferes with them, will be gradually brought out. It will be interrogated and criticized by enemies, and defended by well-wishers. The multitude of opinions formed concerning it in these respects and many others will be collected, compared, sorted, sifted, selected, rejected, gradually attached to it, separated from it, in the minds of individuals and of the community. It will, in proportion to its native vigor and subtlety, introduce itself into the framework and details of social life, changing public opinion and strengthening or undermining the foundations of established order. Thus in time it will have grown into an ethical code, or into a system of government, or into a theology, or into a ritual, according to its capabilities. And this body of thought, thus laboriously gained, will after all be little more than the proper representative of one idea, being in substance what that idea meant from the first, its complete image as seen in a combination of diversified aspects, with the suggestions and corrections of many minds, and the illustration of many experiences. This process, whether it be longer or shorter in point of time, by which the aspects of an idea are brought into consistency and form, I call its development, being the germination and maturation of some truth or apparent truth on a large mental field. On the other hand, this process will not be a development unless the assemblage of aspects which constitute its ultimate shape really belong to the idea from the first. A republic, for instance, is not a development from a pure monarchy, though it may follow upon it, whereas the Greek tyrant may be considered as included in the idea of democracy. Moreover, a development will have this characteristic, that its action being in the busy scene of human life, it cannot progress at all without cutting across, and thereby destroying or modifying and incorporating into itself existing modes of thinking and operating. The development, then, of an idea is not like an investigation worked out on paper, in which each successive advance is a pure evolution from a foregoing, but it is carried on through and by means of communities of men and their leaders and guides, and it employs their minds as its instruments, and depends upon them while it uses them. And so, as regards existing opinions, principles, measures, and institutions of the community which it has invaded, it develops by establishing relations between itself and them. It employs itself in giving them a new meaning and direction, in creating what may be called a jurisdiction over them, in throwing off whatever in them it cannot assimilate. It grows when it incorporates, and its identity is found not in isolation, but in continuity and sovereignty. This it is that imparts to the history both of states and of religions its specially turbulent and polemical character. Such is the explanation of the wranglings, whether of schools or of parliaments. It is the warfare of ideas under their various aspects, striving for the mastery, each of them enterprising, engrossing, imperious, more or less incompatible with the rest, and rallying followers or rousing foes according as it acts upon the faith, the prejudices, or the interest of parties or classes. Moreover, an idea not only modifies but is modified, or at least influenced, by the state of things in which it is carried out, and is dependent in various ways on the circumstances which surround it. Its development proceeds quickly or slowly, as it may be. The order of succession in its separate stages is variable. It shows differently in a small sphere of action and in an extended. It may be interrupted, retarded, mutilated, distorted by external violence. It may be enfeebled by the effort of ridding itself of domestic foes. It may be impeded and swayed, or even absorbed, by counter-energetic ideas. It may be colored by the received tone of thought into which it comes, or depraved by the intrusion of foreign principles, or at length shattered by the development of some original fault within it. But whatever be the risk of corruption from intercourse with the world around, such a risk must be encountered if a great idea is duly to be understood, and much more if it is to be fully exhibited. It is elicited and expanded by trial, and battles into perfection and supremacy. Nor does it escape the collision of opinion even in its earlier years, nor does it remain truer to itself and with a better claim to be considered one and the same, though externally protected from vicissitude and change. It is indeed sometimes said that the stream is clearest near the spring. Whatever use may fairly be made of this image, it does not apply to the history of a philosophy or belief, which on the contrary is more equable and purer and stronger when its bed has become deep and broad and full. It necessarily rises out of an existing state of things, and for a time savors of the soil. Its vital element needs disengaging from what is foreign and temporary, and is employed in efforts after freedom which become more vigorous and hopeful as its years increase. Its beginnings are no measure of its capabilities nor of its scope. At first no one knows what it is or what it is worth. It remains perhaps for a time quiescent. It tries, as it were, its limbs, and tests the ground under it, and feels its way. From time to time it makes essays which fail, and are in consequence abandoned. It seems in suspense which way to go. It wavers, and at length strikes out in one definite direction. In time it enters upon strange territory. Points of controversy alter their bearing. Parties rise and around it. Dangers and hopes appear in new relations, and old principles reappear under new forms. It changes with them, in order to remain the same. In a higher world it is otherwise. But here below, to live is to change, and to be perfect is to have changed often. End of Chapter 1, Section 1.